Hey there guitar fans, this is George Hall with burnsmusicstock.com, and today we're going to be looking at string bending. And string bending is a very commonly used technique in all kinds of music, whether you do heavy metal, rock or jazz or blues or country. It's used in a lot of different ways. And if you haven't already taken a look at the minor pentatonic lesson, I urge you to do so now, as that's what we're going to be covering in this lesson. So let's take a closer look at how the technique of string bending works. So we're actually going to be kind of using the A minor pentatonic as our skeleton for today's string bends. So again, if you haven't already checked out the pentatonic lesson, I urge you to do so now, as we're going to be using it in this lesson. Here's a little refresher. And with this bending example, we're going to be bending from the 8th fret on the B string, and we're going to be bending the note up a whole tone. And it's going to go from the G to the A, and here's how it looks and sounds. And basically the sound that we want to replicate is this. So going from the 8th fret to the 10th fret. Now that's really useful, because at first it's going to be quite hard to get the note sounding in tune. But use that as a reference point when you're practicing. So when you're bending the note up, we want it to sound like So let's take a closer look at the wrist movement. So as far as the movement of the actual hand and wrist is concerned, we're going to be bending the string up, and that requires our wrist to pivot. So we're going to try and go for this kind of motion. And as you can see, my wrist and hand comes closer and further up the guitar, like so. So that's how we really ideally want to be moving our hand and our wrist. It's a pivoting motion. Some players like to use a lot more hand and a lot more arm, but I would advise this way for trying to bend the string. And as well, depending on where your thumb is as a fulcrum point on the back of the neck, the more leverage you'll be able to have to actually bend the note. So let's take a look at what our fingers are doing. So our fingers, we will generally be bending the note with our 3rd finger on the 8th fret, and then these 2 fingers here are going to support behind to help lift the note up. And the reason for that being is one finger alone isn't really ideally strong enough to give that note a good strong bend. And I'll just show you, if I attempted to bend that note with one finger, it's not great. So if you add your 2 fingers in behind to support that note being bent, there's a lot more strength and a lot more control, and you'll be able to get the note a lot more in tune by doing that. So now let's talk a little bit about licks. So we've talked a little bit about the actual action and physical action of bending a string, and now we're going to talk a little bit about adding a little bit to bending to make it sound really nice. So vibrato is commonly used in string bending to make it sound a little bit more bluesier or rockier, whatever kind of thing you're going for. So again, we're going to go back to bending from the 8th fret up to this note, and here again. But if we were to add vibrato on that note, it's basically just gently vibrating the note back and forth, and that creates this kind of sound. And as you can hear, that's a little bit more easier on the ear, and it's a little bit more musical sounding. So when you're practicing vibrato, generally if you're going for a kind of medium pace vibrato, nothing too aggressive, it's just a gentle and slowly vibrating the note. Now you can go as mad as you want with it. You can just go, or it really is down to your musical taste and your ears to decide how you want to do your vibrato. So let's take a closer look at some licks that we can use to incorporate. Okay, in this example, I'll just play through the lick and then we'll break it down. And we're going to use our first finger on the 5th fret of the B string, and we're going to pick that note. Then we're going to take our 3rd finger, put it on the 8th fret, and then bend up. A nice bit of vibrato on the end of that note. Then we're going to pick the 5th fret of the E string with our 1st finger. Then back to the 8th fret with our 3rd finger on the B string. And then to the 5th fret of the B string with our 1st finger. And a nice little vibrato to finish off the lick. So here's the next example. And here it is, nice and slow. 3rd finger on the 8th fret, and we're going to bend up a whole tone with a nice bit of vibrato on the end. Then we're going to pick the 5th fret of the E string with our 1st finger. Then we're going to pick the 8th fret of the B string with our 3rd finger. Then to the 5th fret with our 1st finger on the B string. And then we're going to put our 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the G string and bend up a whole tone with a bit of vibrato on the end. And that up to tempo again. So we've had a look at a few examples of how to bend strings and using vibrato. And one thing I would advise in terms of practicing string bending is listen to players that you like and see how they incorporate string bending and vibrato. I know from my own experiences with learning how to play guitar, generally I'll listen to a lot of a player or a certain band and how they generate their sound. And it just helps you take in a lot of influences and improve on your string bending techniques and whatever other things that you're working on. But there is one simple rule of thumb that I'll just share with you. It's good if you're aiming to bend a note. So for example, if we go back to the 8th fret and we're bending up to this note here, it's good just to play that note and hear how it sounds. And that's a really good reference point in terms of how to get your bend sounding in tune. So if I was to go, I can hear that both of those notes sound pretty similar, and I've bent the note in tune. So I hope you've enjoyed my lesson on string bending. This lesson's been with burnsmusic.com. See you again.